Chapter 1. The Dream of Absolute Control. We are told that self-mastery is the key to success. But what happens when you master yourself so completely that you forget how to be human? This is the tale of an African legend of a man who conquered the world by conquering his own pain, until it drove him mad. Before we begin, listen carefully. If you have ever tried to become stronger by killing your emotions, if you have ever believed that discipline means silence, pain, and isolation, if you are chasing self-mastery and secretly feel yourself going numb, then this story is for you. This is not just a story about a king. It is a mirror. If this story speaks to you even once, like this video, it tells the algorithm this truth matters. If you want more dark psychological stories that expose the hidden cost of greatness, subscribe now. And as you listen, I want you to answer one question in the comments. What emotion have you been taught to suppress to become strong? Your answer may help someone else realize they are not alone. Now, let me tell you about a man who conquered the world and lost his soul. Every generation is taught the same lie, and no king in African history believed it more than Shaka Zulu. If you suffer enough, you will become strong. If you discipline yourself enough, you will become free. If you conquer your weakness, you will conquer the world. Shaka believed this lie more than anyone who came before him. Before he was a king, Shaka was a wound. He was born unwanted, mocked as illegitimate, pushed aside by his father, and forced to grow up knowing he was not supposed to exist. Shame followed him like a shadow that never left his feet. Other boys learned laughter. Shaka learned silence. Other boys learned comfort. Shaka learned pain. Pain became his teacher. From that pain, a dream was born, not a dream of love or peace, but of control. If the world could hurt him, then he would become something the world could not hurt. If weakness invited cruelty, then weakness had to die. Not just in him, but everywhere. Shaka did not want to rule people. He wanted to remake humans. When he rose among the Zulu, he didn't see men, he saw raw material. Flesh that could be hardened, minds that could be sharpened, fear that could be burned away. His vision of strength was clean, sharp, and merciless. Emotion was disorder. Softness was decay. Attachment was danger. So he trained his warriors the way fire trains iron. He took away their sandals and forced them to run barefoot across thorns and stone. Blood became normal. Pain became routine. The lesson was simple. If your body screams and you keep moving, the body eventually stops screaming. Shaka believed this was mastery. He forbade sexual relations among his soldiers unless they had proven themselves through battle. Desire, he believed, made men weak. Love distracted the blade. Longing softened the hand. So he cut it out, not with knives, but with rules and fear. What he was really doing was teaching men to distrust their own humanity. And it worked. The Zulu army became something the region had never seen. Fast, relentless, precise. Shaka redesigned warfare itself, replacing long-throwing spears with short-stabbing ones, forcing warriors into brutal closeness with their enemies. Killing was no longer distant. It was personal, intimate, unavoidable. He created the famous bullhorn formation, 2 flanks encircling the enemy while the center held firm. Militarily, it was genius. Psychologically, it was revealing. Shaka did not just want to defeat enemies. He wanted to surround them, to leave no escape, to crush resistance completely. This was how he treated weakness too. Shaka conquered land after land, tribe after tribe. His name became a warning whispered before battles even began. But inside, something else was happening, something no one celebrated. Every victory reinforced a dangerous belief. That control was the same as strength. The more he succeeded, the more he tightened his grip. Not just on others, but on himself. He allowed himself no grief for his childhood, no anger toward his father, no softness, no rest. He buried those parts deep and crowned discipline as king. In modern language, psychology would call this the birth of a false self, a mask built to survive trauma. To the world, Shaka appeared unstoppable. Inside, he was holding together a fractured boy with rules, violence, and willpower. And for a time, it worked. That is the trap. Extreme self-mastery often looks like enlightenment from the outside. People admire it. They praise it. They try to copy it. But what they don't see is the cost. When you silence emotion instead of understanding it, it doesn't disappear. It waits. Shaka did not heal his pain. He organized it. He disciplined it. He weaponized it. And the more perfect his kingdom became, the more fragile his mind grew. Because no human can live forever in armor. No matter how strong the walls are, something inside always wants to breathe. And soon, something would happen that discipline could not solve. Something that no amount of control could command. The one bond Shaka never allowed himself to sever was his mother, Nandi. She was the last place where the wounded child inside him still existed. And when she died, the armor cracked. What emerged next was not weakness, but madness born from ungrieved love. Chapter 2. The Death That Shattered the Mask. Nandi was not just Shaka's mother. She was his anchor. In a life built on rejection, she was the one constant that told him he was real, that he mattered. When the world called him illegitimate, she defended him. When power hardened him, she softened him, quietly, privately, away from the eyes of warriors and enemies. She was the last place where Shaka did not have to perform strength. When Nandi died, something inside Shaka collapsed, but not in a way people expected. He did not cry like a child. He did not break down in public. He did not retreat to mourn. Instead, he did what he had always done. He tried to control the pain. Grief is an emotion that demands to be felt. It cannot be reasoned with. It cannot be ordered away. It does not respond to discipline or threats. Grief asks for stillness, tears, and surrender, things Shaka had outlawed inside himself long ago. So when grief came, he treated it like an enemy. He turned his pain outward. Shaka declared that the entire kingdom must mourn with him. No crops were to be planted. No milk was to be used. Celebration was forbidden. Pregnancy was punished. Anyone who appeared insufficiently sad was executed. This was not leadership. This was psychological collapse wearing the crown of authority. What Shaka was really saying was simple and terrifying. If I must suffer, everyone must suffer. Psychology calls this emotional contagion through power. When a leader cannot regulate their inner world, they force the outer world to mirror their chaos. Shaka had lost the one emotional connection that kept him human, and without it, his discipline turned into cruelty. The mask cracked, but instead of falling off, it fused tighter to his face. He could not accept the truth that mattered most. That love makes loss inevitable. Rather than grieving his mother, he tried to erase the conditions that made grief possible. If joy was gone, then loss could not deepen. If life stopped, then death would not hurt as much. This is the dark side of self-mastery rarely spoken about. When control replaces feeling, pain does not disappear, it mutates. Shaka's soldiers began to fear him not as a king, but as a force of unpredictable punishment. The same man who once rewarded discipline now killed without logic. The same system that once created order now produced terror. And still, Shaka believed he was being strong. Inside his mind, he was fighting grief the same way he fought enemies, with overwhelming force. But grief is not a rival tribe. It cannot be surrounded. It cannot be stabbed. The harder you attack it, the deeper it cuts you back. Jungian psychology would say this was the moment Shaka's shadow took control. The shadow is not evil. It is the part of you refuse to acknowledge. Shaka's shadow was filled with uncried tears, unspoken fear, and a terrified child who never felt safe. For years, he kept it locked away through discipline and conquest. But when Nandi died, the lock broke. And what came out was not sadness, it was rage without direction. This is why extreme stoicism often fails. Suppressing emotion creates pressure. Pressure without release eventually explodes. And when it explodes in someone with absolute power, entire nations bleed. Shaka's kingdom began to weaken from within. Hunger spread. Fear replaced loyalty. Whispers followed him through his own halls. The same men who once worshipped him now watched him carefully, like hunters waiting for a wounded lion to stumble. Yet Shaka could not see it. In his mind, he was still mastering himself, still proving strength, still refusing to bow to weakness. But something subtle had changed. Before, his control was strategic. Now, it was compulsive. Before, discipline served a vision. Now, it served pain. Psychology teaches that when a person builds their identity entirely on control, any loss feels like annihilation. Shaka did not just lose his mother. He lost the last witness to his softer self. Without her, he had no mirror that reflected anything but the warrior. So he became only that. No balance. No mercy. No rest. The tragedy is not that Shaka grieved too much. It is that he did not grieve at all. He mistook emotional numbness for strength and called it mastery. But numbness is not power. It is the absence of integration. And a mind that refuses to integrate pain will eventually be ruled by it. The kingdom felt it before he did. Fields lay empty. Bellies shrank. Fear grew louder than loyalty. The empire that discipline built began to rot under the weight of one man's unprocessed sorrow. This was the moment Shaka crossed the invisible line, not from king to tyrant, but from wounded human to fragmented self. And once that line is crossed, mastery becomes a prison. In the next chapter, we will see how the system Shaka created, designed to eliminate weakness, turned back on him. How total control invites betrayal. And how the mind, when pushed too far, begins to destroy the very structures it once perfected. Chapter 3. When discipline turns on its creator. Every system reveals its true nature under stress. The system Shaka built was designed for war, not for grief. It was engineered for obedience, not for healing. It produced warriors who followed commands without question, but it could not produce loyalty when the commands stopped making sense. After Nondi's death, Shaka's discipline no longer created strength. It created fear. Fear is efficient in the short term. It sharpens attention. It silences dissent. But over time, fear rots trust. And when trust disappears, discipline becomes brittle. It looks solid, but it cracks easily. Shaka did not notice this shift because his identity was fused with control. To him, questioning was weakness. Hesitation was betrayal. Any sign of emotional resistance looked like disobedience. So he tightened the rules. More punishments. More executions. More absolute demands for loyalty. This is the paradox of extreme self-mastery. The more you rely on control to feel safe, the more control you need when life reminds you that safety is an illusion. Shaka's soldiers had been trained to suppress their pain, hunger, and fear, just like he had. But humans are not machines. You can silence emotion for a while, but it leaks out through cracks, whispers, hesitation, glances exchanged in the dark. The same warriors who once ran barefoot across thorns without complaint now flinched, not from pain, but from unpredictability. They did not know which version of Shaka they would face each day, the visionary commander or the grieving tyrant. Psychologically, this is known as identity collapse under rigidity. When a person's sense of self allows no flexibility, any disruption becomes catastrophic. Shaka could not adapt because adaptation requires softness, the very thing he spent his life erasing. His inner world became a battlefield with no ceasefire. The rules that once protected him now trapped him. He could not show grief without shattering the image of invincibility he had built. He could not show doubt without undermining the system that gave him power. So he chose the only option his mind allowed, escalation. But escalation always demands a target. Since the real source of his pain, loss, was untouchable, he turned against imagined threats. He saw disloyalty where there was exhaustion. He saw rebellion where there was hunger. His mind, deprived of emotional processing, filled the gap with paranoia. This is how discipline mutates into obsession. The more Shaka punished, the less stable he became. The more unstable he became, the more he punished. It was a closed loop with no exit. His closest advisors began to disappear. Some were executed. Others withdrew. The palace grew quieter, not from peace, but from fear. Silence replaced counsel. And silence is dangerous to a ruler who no longer hears reality. In psychology, this is the moment where the shadow fully takes the throne. The shadow does not announce itself. It convinces you that it is reason, justice, necessity. It speaks in absolutes. It demands purity. It frames cruelty as strength. Shaka's shadow told him, if you loosen control, everything will fall apart. If you soften, they will destroy you. If you feel, you will break. So he chose not to feel. But a mind that refuses to feel becomes hollow, and hollow minds echo. Shaka began to live inside his own fear. Every face looked like a threat. Every delay felt like defiance. He had conquered external enemies, but inside, he was surrounded by ghosts. The tragic irony is this: the discipline that built his empire also taught others how to remove him. He trained men to act without emotion. He trained them to obey silently. He trained them to strike decisively. And now, those same traits were being aimed at him. The rigid structure he created left no room for forgiveness, negotiation, or repair. So when fear outweighed loyalty, the only solution the system allowed was elimination. Control teaches people how to survive you. Shaka believed mastery meant never bending. Psychology teaches the opposite. Flexibility is a sign of strength. A tree that never bends breaks in the storm. By the time Shaka sensed the shift, it was too late. His isolation was complete. His authority remained absolute on the surface, but underneath, the emotional foundation was gone. He stood at the center of a perfect system, alone. No confidants, no mirrors, no human warmth, only rules. And rules cannot love you back. The final stage of extreme self-mastery is not greatness. It is loneliness disguised as power. In the next chapter, we will step fully into the psychological core of Shaka's fall, the creation of the false self, the death of the authentic self, and the moment when control becomes indistinguishable from madness. Chapter 4. The False Self and the Death of the Human King. By the end, Shaka was no longer living as a man. He was performing as an idea. The idea was simple and deadly, strength without softness. This is what psychology calls the false self, a personality built to survive pain, not to live. It looks powerful. It feels efficient. It gets results. But it is hollow at the center, because it is designed to protect you from feeling, not to help you understand yourself. Shaka's false self was flawless on the outside. He was decisive, feared, revered, unquestioned. Every command still carried the weight of life and death. But inside, the human king, the child who once needed comfort, the son who loved his mother, had been buried alive under rules, rituals, and violence. The tragedy is that Shaka mistook this inner emptiness for clarity. When emotions faded, he felt clean. When doubt disappeared, he felt focused. When compassion died, he felt free. But numbness is not freedom. It is dissociation. Dissociation is the mind's last defense when pain becomes unbearable. Instead of processing reality, the mind steps away from it. Feelings flatten. People turn into objects. Life becomes mechanical. This is not mastery. It is survival mode mistaken for enlightenment. Shaka could no longer tell the difference. He believed he had transcended emotion. In truth, he had amputated it. This is why his punishments became extreme and symbolic. Killing was no longer about justice or order. It was about reinforcing the false self. Every execution told him, "I am still in control." Every act of cruelty drowned out the voice inside that whispered, "You are breaking." Psychologically, the more a person invests in a false self, the more terrifying self-reflection becomes. To look inward would mean facing grief, fear, and shame, all the things Shaka spent his life avoiding. So he stayed outward-focused, enforcing rules, chasing perfection, demanding purity. Perfectionism is often trauma in disguise. Shaka did not seek perfection because it was beautiful. He sought it because imperfection reminded him of pain. The human cost of this inner collapse was immense. Mothers starved. Children suffered. Warriors died not in battle, but under suspicion. The kingdom became a stage for one man's unresolved grief. And yet, Shaka likely believed he was protecting his people. This is the most dangerous illusion of extreme self-mastery, the belief that your inner discipline justifies outer harm. When someone loses access to their emotions, they also lose access to empathy. Without empathy, moral boundaries blur. Shaka was no longer cruel because he enjoyed it. He was cruel because he could no longer feel. This is the moment the human king died. What remained was a symbol, untouchable, absolute, isolated. A ruler who could command thousands but could not sit with his own sorrow. A man who conquered land but lost access to his inner life. History tells us that Shaka's assassination came not from a foreign enemy, but from within his own circle. This is not coincidence. When a leader becomes unreachable as a human being, the system finds another way to restore balance. Psychology calls this self-correction through collapse. A system that cannot bend will break itself. Shaka's mind had already broken long before his body did. The assassination was merely the physical conclusion of an internal death that happened years earlier, the day he decided that feeling was weakness. This is where the lesson sharpens. Modern culture praises relentless discipline, hustle, control, emotional suppression in the name of productivity. We are told to be stoic, to push through, to ignore feelings. Shaka is the extreme end of this belief. He shows us what happens when mastery is defined as domination of the self instead of integration of the self. True strength does not come from erasing emotion. It comes from holding it without letting it rule you. Shaka never learned this distinction. And so, the false self ruled completely, until it could no longer sustain the weight of reality. In the final chapter, we will draw the mirror fully toward us. We will uncover the dark truth about self-mastery, the role of the shadow, and how to pursue strength without losing your soul. Chapter 5. The Dark Truth About Self-Mastery. Shaka's story does not end with his death. It ends with a question. What does it really mean to master yourself? For generations, we have been taught that strength means control, that emotions are obstacles. That pain should be silenced, ignored, or conquered. We celebrate discipline that looks clean and ruthless because it promises certainty in a chaotic world. Shaka followed this path to its absolute limit, and it cost him his mind, his kingdom, and his humanity. The dark truth about self-mastery is this: you cannot dominate your inner world without eventually being dominated by it. Psychology tells us that the self is not a machine. It is an ecosystem. Emotions are not enemies. They are signals. Grief tells us we loved. Fear tells us something matters. Anger tells us a boundary was crossed. When these signals are suppressed instead of understood, they do not disappear. They move underground. Carl Jung called this the shadow. The shadow is everything you refuse to be. Everything you bury to maintain an image. Everything that does not fit the story you tell about yourself. Shaka's shadow was built from rejection, shame, and ungrieved love. For years, he kept it hidden behind discipline and conquest. But the shadow always collects interest. The more you ignore it, the more power it gains. This is why Shaka's collapse looked irrational. From the outside, his actions seemed mad. From the inside, they were the inevitable result of decades of emotional exile. His shadow did not destroy him suddenly, it ruled him gradually. Modern self-mastery culture often makes the same mistake. We are told to wake earlier, work harder, feel less. To turn life into a battlefield where softness is weakness and rest is failure. This creates productive people, but emotionally starved ones. People who look functional but feel empty. People who succeed outwardly while breaking inwardly. This is how a false self is born. The false self is efficient, disciplined, admired. But it is also fragile. It cannot handle loss. It cannot process grief. It cannot sit with uncertainty. When life inevitably strikes, through death, failure, or heartbreak, the false self panics. And panic with power is dangerous. True self-mastery is not about killing parts of yourself. It is about integrating them. Integration means you can feel anger without becoming violent. You can feel grief without collapsing. You can feel fear without surrendering to it. It means you allow emotion to pass through you instead of letting it harden inside you. Shaka never learned this because his world rewarded suppression. Every time he ignored pain, he grew stronger. Every time he hardened, he won. Until the day pain arrived that strength could not defeat. That day comes for everyone. The lesson is not do not be disciplined. The lesson is do not confuse numbness with wisdom. Discipline without reflection creates tyranny. Control without compassion creates isolation. Strength without softness creates madness. Shaka's life is not a warning against ambition. It is a warning against inhuman ambition, the kind that sacrifices inner truth for outer dominance. The real conquest is not over others. It is not even over yourself. It is over the fear of being human. If Shaka had been allowed to grieve, to mourn openly, to rest in his weakness, history might remember him not as a tragic tyrant, but as a transformed leader. But the culture of absolute mastery gave him no language for sorrow, only commands. So his sorrow became law. His pain became policy. His shadow became king. The final mirror turns toward us. Ask yourself this. What parts of you are you silencing in the name of strength? What emotions are you calling weakness because they scare you? What pain are you disciplining instead of understanding? Because whatever you refuse to feel today will rule you tomorrow. True self-mastery is not the absence of emotion. It is the ability to sit with it without losing yourself. That is the mastery Shaka never found. And that is the mastery that saves kingdoms, starting with your own. If this story unsettled you, that means it worked. Because Shaka's fall is not ancient history, it is a warning. A warning about what happens when discipline replaces humanity. When strength is built by silencing the self. When success costs you your inner life. If this story made you reflect, even for a moment, like this video, that single action tells the algorithm that deep stories still matter in a loud world. If you want more psychological stories that expose the dark truth behind power, ambition, and self-mastery, subscribe. This channel is not about comfort, it's about clarity. And before you leave, answer this in the comments. What part of yourself have you been suppressing in the name of being strong? Someone reading your answer may finally feel seen. Remember this. You don't lose yourself all at once. You lose yourself slowly, by calling pain discipline and numbness control. Stay human, and I'll see you in the next story.